Tech titan turned philanthropist Bill Gates says that the progress of his foundations and others in fighting malaria over the last 15 years is in jeopardy. The first increase in malaria cases in a decade have been reported recently, and South Africa is seeing a spike in the number of malaria cases in Limpopo, Mpumalanga and northern KwaZulu-Natal. More than a decade ago, Gates donated the bulk of his fortune to fight disease across the globe. In an interview a short while ago in Davos in Switzerland, SABC's Francis Hurd asked Gates about malaria and the role of technology in shaping the future of the continent of Africa.
Mr. Gates, it's a great pleasure talking to you on behalf of the South African Broadcasting Corporation. You were so positive about malaria, about eradicating deaths, even eradicating malaria-carrying mosquitoes. But we are feeling the flare-ups in several provinces in South Africa. What's happened to cause the slippage?
Well, malaria deaths are down quite dramatically in the last 15 years. We're down about 60%. Maintaining an eradication in the southern part of Africa is very difficult because you have a lot of people traveling, still a lot of malaria up in Mozambique, and so it's very easy in a year where the weather lets the mosquitoes thrive, it's easy for it to spread down south into both Swaziland and parts of South Africa. We have successful cases where you do the right interventions and you're able to maintain it at zero, but it's not easy. It takes a serious, great execution to be able to do that. In this case, you'll probably have to cut the cases in Mozambique, otherwise the retransmission force will just be too strong.
So many competing priorities here in Davos, people talking about refugee, the refugee crises, women's issues, so many global economic issues with the US turning inward. How do you get people to care about global health in the face of so many conflicting priorities?
Well, there's very few diseases that are killing about 500,000 children a year, and the economic effects of malaria, the effects on kids even who survive, who never develop physically or mentally. You know, the stunting rate in Africa is over 40%. So this is a huge disease. It's gotten increased attention in the last 15 years. If we invent new drugs, if we renew the bed nets, there's actually the resistance to the insecticide there, so we have to work with the chemical companies to get new chemicals onto those nets. If you stand still, you're going to go backwards. And we used to have over 1 million deaths a year. If we let the drugs resistance go up and the bed net resistance go up, it'll spread back. And so it's very urgent. We're either making progress in one direction or the other. There are lots of places, like we're announcing a big project to get rid of malaria in Central America. We're working in Southeast Asia. So we want to shrink the map. Ideally, within 10 years, we'd get the map so it's mostly Central Africa. That would be the best case, and then we'd take the next 10 years to get rid of it there.
Mr. Gates, several years ago, you gave away a majority of your wealth to fight things like global disease. You're here at Davos, US President Donald Trump about to arrive, and he's talking about cutting aid, a concern that he's looking inward. What are your thoughts on his presence and what he's saying about something that's close to your heart?
Well, the US under a Republican president, President Bush, increased its generosity, particularly for HIV, TB, and malaria. And South Africa and many African countries have been recipients of that generosity. The US Congress has the final word on these budgets, and even though a cut was recommended for 2017, that budget was maintained, and I'm hopeful that'll continue. The Congress sees that Africa gives credit to the US for this. If we withdraw the money, the HIV deaths would go up quite dramatically, and so this is an epidemic that could go back to its peak because the number of young people, particularly in the countries like Zambia, Zimbabwe, that age group that's susceptible is growing in size.
Would you use your clout to try and lobby the US president directly in any way?
Well, I'm certainly the biggest proponent whenever I see the president, members of Congress. You know, I go with members of Congress to Africa and get to see this good work. You know, I've chosen to put billions of dollars of my own money against malaria and HIV. So making sure that money is super well spent, making sure we're funding the great scientists to innovate in these things over the long run. It is feasible to do eradications. Yes, there's very little else that I talk about.
Do what you can. On malaria, I was very interested that you were saying that aid to various African countries hasn't crowded out governments themselves getting involved, other people getting involved, but African governments are actually coming on board to the fight. Just explain a little bit about what you're seeing. Case.
Well, certainly the willingness to recognize there was an HIV epidemic. There was a long period where South Africa simply wouldn't acknowledge, and I had lots of meetings with the leadership saying, hey, this is a real crisis. We can't put money in here unless the government acknowledges this. That's changed. We're not there yet in terms of the coverage, getting all the mother-to-child transmission down, but it's been a good period. We have to keep pushing, getting the message out to young people in terms of their behavior. We haven't been able to change that much. So, it's over, it's over 1.5 million deaths still. And as I said, it could go back up to larger numbers unless we double down.
Can we talk about Africa? Because that's where a lot of your interest in global disease, in the inequity, the unequal access to healthcare caught your attention. And I'd love to talk to you about technology. What's next? What is the next wave? And could Africa be part of the wave, or could we be left behind? Because there are predictions of this future where only a small elite right at the top has the skills to do what's required to make the robots work, for example, and everybody else could even be on some form of welfare. What are the chances for Africa if that's the future that we're heading to?
Well, in the case of education, as governments are serious about whether kids are really learning in their schools, are those the best teachers? Are they really educating the kids? Then you can see, very strong results. And in Asia, running those education systems, even countries like Vietnam that are a lot poorer than South Africa, run fantastic education systems, but they've really decided educating the kids is the goal that they have, and they really make sure they invest in the people and only pick the people who are doing that very well. So yes, Africa, because of its youth bulge, it has potential, but you've got to get the health issues. You can't have malnutrition and stunting, and you've got to have better schools. And that's why everyone wants to help Africa. Africa governments are key to this, but I am optimistic.